Okay, and can everyone see?
Yep.
Okay, let me just maximize that. Okay, so I'm just going to keep this fairly casual, like this to be a bit of a conversation. So please interrupt me with questions if at any point I'm going too quickly or if you want to clarify anything, okay? And just call me Yamin, thank you. So I really want to talk about the plastic recycling industry's investment opportunities. Plastic recycling as an industry, you probably have heard recently with the controversies of the European sort of governments, American government, even the Japanese government dumping their waste plastic into Malaysia and other Southeast Asian countries. And then all of a sudden, everybody's aware that there is a big plastic recycling industry in Malaysia, but it actually been around for quite a while. Plastic has only been with us as a mainstream consumer product for about 40 years. But pretty much as soon as it started, the recycling industry sort of started because plastic is such a versatile, dynamic product. So, and it can easily be recycled. So, even though it's been around for so long, the question remains, why do we see so little? The general sort of manufacturing industry is actually reluctant to use recycled plastic for various reasons. And one is that the recycling capacity is actually very, very small. So there's just a lot of virgin plastic around. It's just so much easier to buy virgin plastic. To actually buy recycled plastic, you have to find multiple suppliers. For most plastic manufacturers, the volume is huge. So when you talk about having only suppliers supplying, small quantities, it makes it very difficult to manage the supply chain. Just to give you a couple of numbers here to put in context, in Asia Pacific, the recycling capacity is only about 700,000 tons a year. It sounds like a lot, but it's actually tiny compared to what is being used around the world on an annual basis. Virgin plastic usage up to 2 years ago is about 300 million tons a year. So that's several times over, well, almost a few hundred times over the recycling capacity within Asia Pacific. There is also recycling capacity in Europe and US, and they're slightly bigger, but not a lot more. So we're really talking about, the recycled plastic is just not able to meet the demand of the actual plastic industry. But there's also pushback from consumers in that consumers tend not to like recycled product. They think it's rubbish. It's fished out of the landfill. It's fished out of the drain and so on. It's potentially dirty. It's smelly and so on. But I think the perception here needs to be sort of turned around. So the consumer market also needs some education and a bit of marketing there. There's also very little sort of standards in terms of recycled plastic, whereas virgin plastic is pretty standardized in terms of how they're manufactured. So everybody knows what to expect when they buy virgin plastic. But when it comes to recycled plastic, it really depends on the source. And that's not necessarily standardized. As you can imagine, recycled plastic comes from waste plastic, and it can be anything. Right now, because capacity is low, cost can be high. Virgin plastic is usually it's more expensive because obviously it's nicer, it's cleaner, it's fantastic. But with oil prices on a downtrend, over time, virgin plastic is becoming cheaper and cheaper over time. And also, there's no branding, there's no marketing. So people don't really know what recycled plastic is, whereas virgin plastic, it comes in all sorts of brands and so on and so forth. One of the most famous brands you know of. A plastic product is probably Lego, for example. All their products made entirely of plastic, except for maybe their rubber tires. That's pretty much a plastic product brand that is very, very famous. But if you look at overall around the world, the mood is changing because we are using too much plastic. And every year, there's this list that's being published around the world that names and shames all the biggest users of plastic around the world, which is basically FMCG companies like Coca-Cola, Nestle, and Pepsi, and Unilever, and so on. And if you go to any beach around the world at this point of time, and you pick up a piece of waste plastic, it's probably from one of these brands, and it's very, very damaging to the brand. And these companies are being put under a lot of pressure to do something about plastic pollution. So their products are really polluting the oceans, polluting a lot of beaches, not just filling up landfills and so on. So, and there are countries that are moving towards banning plastic. But banning plastic is not that straightforward. Malaysia is talking about banning single-use plastic by the year 2030. A lot of supermarkets have stopped using plastic bags and made you bring your own, whatever bag you have. A lot of them are still made of plastic, but, they stopped giving out those disposable ones, which are good effort. But banning plastic is not straightforward because if you compare to all the other material that you might replace plastic with, they're just not as good in terms of weight, in terms of melting temperature, in terms of water resistance, in terms of transparency, heat resistance, and other mechanical properties. The only thing that all the other material could beat plastic on is that most of them are probably more environmentally friendly in the sense that if you leave them out on a field somewhere, they're not going to poison the environment, whereas plastic could degrade and leak out chemicals and stuff. So, if you take wood, for example, as a replacement, wood, generally is heavier than plastic. It's got limited water resistance. You can't make it transparent. Well, it's certainly not very heat resistant because it's going to catch fire. And it's got very limited mechanical properties. You can't bend it too much without breaking it. Metal is quite comparable to plastic in many, many ways. But for you to recycle plastic, recycle metal, for example, you need to heat it up to much, much higher temperatures before you can melt it. You can't do nice, clear, transparent metal bottles, for example, to show off, your beautiful wine or other juices, drinks, and so on. And it can be, of course, a lot more expensive than plastic itself. So if you just look at this table, it shows very clearly that plastic, in many, many, many cases, probably in most cases, is the most useful, most suitable, most versatile, most dynamic product to use as a packaging material, as as a container, and so on and so forth. So it's actually really, really hard to replace or to ban plastic altogether. And so recycling is really the answer. So Europe is always in these cases, when it comes to being environmental friendly, has taken the leadership position by imposing an €800 per ton tax on plastic. So this means that for every company that produces anything, right? You produce bottles or produce television sets, or you produce fridges or even cars. For every ton of plastic, virgin plastic you use, you have to pay €800 tax on it. which is a significant amount because the price of recycled plastic is thereabouts. It's at about 800 to 1,000 euros a ton. So what they're trying to say is basically they're trying to make virgin plastic a lot more expensive than recycled plastic to encourage the use of more recycled plastic. So let's see how that works. That's only been introduced in January, end of last year or beginning of this year. So let's see if that's going to make an impact on the recycle industry or recycled plastic industry. But at the same time, because of consumer pressures, companies are having to make a lot of big promises on what they do about their use of plastic. For example, I've just picked up like 3 of the biggest sort of FMCG companies here. Coca-Cola has promised to collect 100% of their containers or the packaging on their containers by 2030. That's quite ambitious. That means every bottle, every cap, every carton that they sort of sell will be collected back, and then 50% of it will be using recycled material, which is also, again, considering how much Coca-Cola sell in a year, it's quite an ambitious target, right? So far, by the year 2020, they've only achieved 20% of their containers using recycled material. So that could be bottle to bottle, which they have done very successfully in Australia and I believe South Africa and Mexico. But in other countries, it's a lot harder. Nestle, for example, they promised to use 100% recyclable or reusable material and reduce the use of virgin plastic by 33% by the year 2025, which is 4 years from now. Again, that's quite ambitious considering what they've achieved so far. Unilever similarly promised to reduce their virgin plastic use by 50%. And like I said, reducing the virgin plastic use and to replace it with any other material is actually really hard. So really what they're saying is they have to replace it with recycled plastic. And again, it's by 2025. Now, so far they haven't shared what they've achieved in terms of their big target. So it'd be interesting to see what they're going to do about it. But there is pressure on them to really start using recycled plastic. So what this is saying is that there should be a market for it, right? These companies, they're making promises to their consumers. The European government is putting pressure on manufacturers by imposing very high tax on virgin plastic. This should make things happen. They should really give a big boost to the recycled plastic industry. But it's not that simple because the recycling industry really needs a lot of urgent attention. Recycling is actually an industry of the future. We're really talking about recycling as a means of extracting material from our environment. In the past, we just dig a hole in the ground and take what we need. Now, all the stuff that we need is actually on the surface, and then we really need to deal with them a lot better. So let's look at what happens in the recycling industry. Essentially, there are 6 steps in recycling of plastic, and recycling of other materials have similar processes to go through as well. First, you have to collect the material. Then you have to sort it. Plastic, especially when it comes to plastic, there are also different types of plastic. You have what I mentioned just now, like the Lego side of plastic, which is called ABS, but then you have your plastic water bottles, which is PET. You have your shampoo bottles, which is HDPE. But you also have very common sort of plastic that's used to make your furniture. The plastic chairs, for example, that's polypropylene, that's PP. So you have all sorts of different types of plastic, and you need to sort them The more you sort them, the more you maintain the integrity of the material, the better you can recycle them. And then you need to crush them. That's just, for easier processing. But a lot of these then are, of course, dirty because they've been used for a long time, or they're food containers, so they have a bit of curry sauce, a bit of this, a bit of that. They need to be washed off. A lot of them have stickers, so you need to, wash away the stickers and the glue that sticks to them, and so on and so forth. So washing is a big process. And then you have the processing. So processing is essentially melting the plastic, and putting them back together again. So and then you can extrude them and cut them into bits called resin, which is sort of rice-sized sort of bits of plastic that the manufacturers can then melt into whatever shape and form that they want, right? So if you look at these 6 steps in the recycling of plastic, 4 of them, which I've sort of highlighted in yellow, has significant issues, significant problems that needs resolution before the recycling industry can really take off and address the industry's needs, right? That they can really, before they can address Coca-Cola and Unilever and all the other industry players' needs. Collection is a problem. You think, wow, we have so much plastic around, how difficult it is to collect. Well, nobody grows up thinking, I want to be a rubbish collector, right? So it's really left to, basically the what do you call, city councils or municipalities to do rubbish collection. But most households, for example, if you take Malaysia, most households don't separate their waste. So everything's mixed together. It's just horrible. Nobody likes to do that job. So they just make it, it's just something that's all dumped together and put in landfill. Sorting, when it's dirty, when it's, mixed up with all the other stuff, there's no machinery that can do that yet. Everything has to be done manually. And again, that's a very, degrading job, sorting through the rubbish, and not many people want to do it. So then you're very much limited to employing, really cheap labor, people who are desperate for a job to do that job. And it's just not very effective. Crushing is fine. Crushing is quite easy. But then you have washing. Washing, in itself, is not too difficult, but it uses a lot of water. And that is a problem because then the water needs to be treated. It has a big environmental impact. A lot of companies, recycling companies, get into trouble with our Department of Environment because they don't treat the water very well. They use huge amounts of water and the water is contaminated, and so on and so forth. So that in itself is a problem, and there needs to be better solutions for that. No pun intended. And then lastly, in processing, again, this is not necessarily rocket science. After all, you're really talking about melting the plastic and then, reforming them into, returning it back to its original form as much as possible. But a lot of times when a plastic is being recycled, the quality of, or rather the mechanical properties of the plastic degrades a little bit. I think there needs to be a bit more, I think there's certainly opportunity for a bit more research and development in this area where you could possibly retain, if not improve, the mechanical properties of recycled plastic so that it doesn't become a second-grade plastic compared to virgin plastic. So if you just look at this whole process alone, there's actually a lot of room for improvement. And right now, companies that have cheap labor, or countries that have cheap labor can do the collecting and sorting. So you find that the recycling industry in Malaysia is relatively robust because we still have significant amount of cheap labor available. Thailand, Southeast Asia in general, you see quite a bit of recycling happening because of that, and also Fuel, Malaysia, for example, has always had a policy of subsidizing our petrol and diesel. So the cost of transportation has been relatively flat over the past few decades, which allows this sort of low cost, low margin business to operate relatively stably. But otherwise, there's actually a lot of work, otherwise in some countries where the cost of petrol is high, cost of transportation is high, you just won't find businessmen being very enthusiastic about recycling. Okay. Now, I'm going to move on to the concept of circular economy, because this is really important concept in recycling, in that so obviously we've most of the world have industrialized for over 100 years now. We're very good at extracting raw materials, oil and metal and all sorts of other things. We're very good at manufacturing of products, and obviously consumerism is massive thing these days. Selling products, yes, who doesn't like a bit of shopping? And obviously consumption of products. We're very big consumers, but we also generate a lot of rubbish, right? What we're not very good at actually are the green items, which is designing a product so that they can be recycled better. Right now, a lot of products are designed as single use. And in fact, it was probably a bit of a trend in the 80s where the more single use, the better it is. Remember, contact lenses went from a 3-month thing to a daily thing, and there are so many things that are trendy as single use products. But in terms of conserving material, we really got to design a product so that they last longer, they can be repaired easily, or they can be parts can be replaced a lot more easily, or even the whole thing should be able to be sort of recycled a lot better. Disposal products, we're also very bad at disposing products. We just pretty much chuck everything into the bin and forget about it, right? It just disappears. Somebody else deals with it. And we go, if we need something, we just go buy some more of it. Collection of waste, again, we see this as someone else's responsibility. We pay pretty much see the government as the main sort of party responsible for this. Let them deal with it. We don't have to deal with it. We pay taxes. We're entitled to not deal with waste. But that is actually, a very bad thing, and we are slowly paying for it through, the increase of landfills and the pollution of our water tables and so on and so forth. And lastly, of course, we're very, very bad at recycling waste material. Very few countries around the world are good at it. Japan is one of the few countries that's leading the way. They recycle about 80% of their material, which is incredible. But they are very, very aware that they have very limited resources. So that's forced them into doing that very well. In certain European countries, they have organized themselves to recycle quite well through this carrot and stick sort of system, through taxing as well as encouraging businesses to take up recycling and so on, and other sorts of regulation. So if you look at this big picture, the circular economy can't quite complete, or rather there are significant gaps within what we call the circular economy, where there's a lot of work that can be done and a lot of opportunities where money can be made, I feel, if we just rethink about how we traditionally do things. So how do you solve the problem of recycling? There are lots and lots of ways. That's the interesting thing about recycling, right? It is, as I said, the industry of the future, but it's stuck in the past. It's been ignored for so long. Nobody's really looked into recycling because it's always been associated with waste and rubbish and smelly and dirty. But if you think about it, petroleum is kind of smelly and sticky and horrible and smelly and toxic and dirty. But look what it is today. 100 years ago, you probably wouldn't, well, maybe 200 years ago, you probably wouldn't touch it with a stick. But nowadays, it's a multi-trillion industry that, pays for scholarships and private jets. So I think, recycling plastic can be the same. We just need to apply a bit of engineering, a bit of investment, a bit of R&D, just as the engineers from 100 years ago had applied, R&D and engineering to sort of extract the potential of what petroleum could be. So, how to solve the problem of recycling? I think we could certainly use a lot more artificial intelligence, for example, in terms of sorting, being able to identify all the different types of plastic that's found in our waste streams. Maybe use of robotics in terms of collection, and maybe drones to collect from house to house instead of sending a giant truck that is a lot more wasteful in terms of using fuel. But we could also be redesigning products, as I said earlier, looking at material science of the plastic itself, education and marketing, but also really monetizing the waste. Monetizing what is essentially raw material. Why should it be? If we just stop using the term waste and just use the term raw material, I think it actually changes people's mindset significantly, and people will see then waste streams as money streams, right? And people will then treat it a lot more with a lot more enthusiasm. But I think the government also has a role to play in terms of encouraging or creating circular economy-centric policies that encourages companies to think about a few more steps down the line for whatever products they're creating, not just for the sale of the product, but also how are they going to collect back their product once it's reached the end of its life cycle. Computer companies are facing that nowadays. In the US, in certain parts of Europe, computer makers are being forced to collect back the old computers once it's reached its end of life, as well as fridges and washing machines and so on and so forth. But I think most importantly, actually, is for businesses to cooperate with each other and look at how they can solve some of the many, many problems that exist within the recycling industry. So I think these are just some of the sort of keywords I just put here to sort of trigger some thoughts about how the recycling industry can certainly improve, but it's certainly not limited to these areas. And I think that once we put our heads together, there's actually a lot more that can be done. So the question is, are you going to make money out of it? I think the question is a simple one, in that if you, number one, there's actually very, very little competition, shockingly. Every country has a different waste management landscape. Not every country have a recycling industry, even though most should. So there's no real major player in recycling. There are some big recycling companies in Europe and maybe in US, but they're all regional. They're all limited to a particular set of regulations tied to a particular state or particular country. They haven't been able to really scale or grow beyond that set of comfortable sort of boundaries that they grew up in. So it's quite an open, wide playing field right now. Secondly, 3 to 400 million tons. I know, sorry, the numbers are about there, but because the numbers are just so big, about 400 million tons of virgin plastic is used every year. That's every year. It's not in total, it's just every year. So by now, which is June, about 200 million tons of virgin plastic have been used, right? If not more, because of COVID, because of all the PPE that we're consuming and the online shopping that we've been doing because we can't leave the house. So, tons and tons and well, 400 million tons of virgin plastic is being used every year. Now, this is worth $500 billion. If we're just taking the sort of a cheapest price of, virgin plastic. So that's a lot of money. And only globally, in the advanced countries, only 9% is recycled. So we're really talking about a significant amount of plastic that's not recycled, that's just going to waste, it's going to landfill, that's falling into the sea. That's just money being flushed away. So there is significant amount of money that can be made here. Now, if you can overcome some of the existing problems, easily, there's quite a few million tons of virgin plastic that can be replaced with recycled plastic. So that's my presentation. That's the case that I was making. My last point, and I'd like to wrap up with this, is plastic pollution is a social problem. It's a behavioral problem. But I believe that when we put a capitalist to find a solution, he will find one, because everybody likes to make money. So there you go.